Okay, great. Thanks, and good morning, everyone, or good day wherever you are. Today we're going to do a coding stream, working a little bit on i3. Specifically, let me pull this up here. Specifically, it's about time to get a new release out within the next, let's say, coming weeks. If we take a look at the website and the download page, you can see that the last release, it came out last year. So the minimum release cadency that we want to target is sort of one new major release a year. And then, as you can see, maybe there's bug fix releases that are necessary. Cool. So in terms of the release process, what I typically do is I look through what has happened between the last version that we released and this version. Let me pull this up right here. So you can see that this is the tag 4.20.1. This was the last version that we released. And then there have been a couple of commits since then, but not too many really. So, you can sort of go through each of them, see what they're about, write a changelog entry, and then see if there's new issues in the bug tracker that relate to one of these, right? So there's not too many new features going into i3 these days because it's largely stable and it largely does what people want. So whenever we add something new, for example, the tiling drag feature that we added recently, it would be good to release it in a way that isn't obviously broken from the start, right? So typically what I want to do is for any new features, figure out if there are any regressions and address them before doing the release, right? So that we don't need to do a bug fix release later on. As you can see, it still sometimes happens, but if we can avoid it, that would be the goal, because that brings down work for everyone involved. Cool. So I identified two separate issues. One of them I found myself, the other one a contributor found, which would be good to fix, but we're probably not going to work on these today in this particular stream. Instead, we're going to take a look at a couple of these that I've marked here as they would be good to fix, even though they're not related to a new feature, right? And that typically means crashes or bugs that are a quick fix where there's really not much sense in, dragging it out. So if you have any questions, related to what I'm doing here, i3 development, software development, anything like that, just post them in the chat and I'll try to address them when I get to it. Otherwise, I'm just gonna start working on these. There's also a couple of open pull requests, but for those, I'm waiting for a review, or I posted a comment waiting for the person who sent the pull request to follow up. All right, so I think we're going to start with this issue here because it seems so innocent. So somebody is telling us that if there is a blank space in the config, that causes non-functionality of the bar output. And in particular, they're saying that if there is a bar config block, and if we leave a space after the output, so I'm thinking that it would be output and then something like HDMI 3, and then there should be a space. And then the person's saying it causes the bar not to show up at all, right? And then they're running the latest version, so that's great. There's no log file because it doesn't seem to be necessary. We'll see about that. Often people are wrong about it, but yeah, we'll give it a shot. Okay, so let's switch to a separate workspace, go into the i3 directory. Actually, I think we're just gonna try and reproduce this on like this particular session. See if we can reproduce this. Okay, so this here would be the bar block that I'm using. You can see I'm changing the font. Status command is i3 status as usual. Okay, so now let's see, the output name here, because I'm working in like a nested X session for streaming, is just default, I think. So output default, this should still work. And then as soon as we add a space after it, that's apparently where things go wrong. So let's see. So we're just going to say i3 restart. Okay, so I can still see the bar at the bottom of the screen. So far, so good. Let's add the space, restart, bar is gone. Okay, so we can reproduce it. One of the things we can do is just go into the i3 log and see if there's anything obvious in here. So let's see, this started, oh yeah, so this is from the very last i3 restart based on the time, I think. We can verify by looking here, but probably, yeah. If you pay very close attention, you can see that I'm able to select the white space here afterwards. So that's with the white space here. So let's see if there's anything in the log lines that gives us a clue. The log is very verbose. Okay, so it says new bar configuration finished, saving. Okay, it might well be, and this would be my first theory, that the space is just taken as a part of the workspace, of the output name. And because there is no output that has a space in it, it just doesn't match, and that's why the bar disappears. So we can verify this by looking at i3 message, and then it has a get bar config message type. Right. Let's see. So the setup here is a little bit convoluted because of all the streaming stuff I'm doing, but no big deal. Okay, so I think in terms of the bar config, the way it works is actually it does take an argument, yeah. And then we just get like this blob of JSON back here where, yeah, if we take a look here, we can see, okay, outputs, there is very clearly a space after the default here. So the white space just isn't stripped at the end of the line. And I'm thinking, you know, in general, I think people would expect, white space to generally be stripped, like at the beginning and at the end of a line. And, you know, if the line is white space only, it should be stripped, it should be skipped entirely. So I'm not entirely sure what we do in the parser, like if we should be stripping the white space there, or if the easier fix is just to say, okay, the output name will just sanitize it and just discard any white space. So why don't we take a look at it together? Okay, so we can start by looking into the config parser. And then I think there should be, if we go into the config directives, yeah, so this is where the bar stuff is happening. We have the bar output, right? But that particular thing, call bar output, yeah. So you can see there's some code generation going on here. We have a custom config parser system for good error reporting. And then it calls into config bar output. We've seen that, and it just calls get string. So this is where all of the arguments are already parsed, right? So if we look into the parser specs, we can see in the config, right? So this is the configuration for what the parser should be doing when it encounters different tokens, such as the output token should go into bar output state. And then here we can see, okay, there is one string argument which should be in the output variable, and then we use that here to do that call. Give me just 1 sec real quick. All right, sorry about that. Okay, in the chat there was a question, what happens if there are 2 spaces in between? Well, do you mean 2 spaces at the end? Because, you know, any number of spaces we should take care of. If there's spaces in between, I think that should actually work, but why don't we try it out? So this makes the bar show up again. So we do output space space. Recompile. Yeah, that works. Okay, so the space in between output and default is not a problem. It's only the space at the very end that is not being stripped here. All right, so we've seen the spec. Now we can go back to the config parser. And I think let's get like a rough sense of the structure here. So this is the parse file function, where we have like a bunch of code for the variable handling right here. And then I think, right, parse config, that's where we want to go into. Right, and I think here is where we can see the white space stripping before every token, but it doesn't do it after the token. So let's see. We have code here for a literal, for a number, for a string. And here we even say the delimiters are white space, closing square bracket, comma, and semicolon. Okay. Right, and then we skip a quoted string, the double quote of the quoted string, line end. Right. Okay, cool. So one thing we could try and do is we could say whenever we parse a string or a word token here, let's see, we could essentially look at the end of it, see if and as long as the character before the terminating null byte is a space of any sort, we could just go back and then terminate the string a little bit earlier, and that way remove the space from it. I think that would be like the most common way to do it in C. So let's see, where would that be? Push string is here. Right, and then, oh, right, yeah, we copied this over, right, character by character so that we can do string escaping. Okay, right, so you can see it's been a while since I last looked at the code, so I need to refamiliarize myself with it too, which is good because then we can all sort of learn together and see if there's any questions. So I think here we can have a token that doesn't have an identifier, which would mean that i3 knows that in the config file there needs to be a string at that point, but it's a fixed string and it doesn't need to be a variable that then later needs to be passed to one of the config directive functions. So this would be the case if we go back into the spec. I think we have like, let's see. All right, this is the config parser. I think in the config it's less common actually. In the commands it would be more common, but typical things are like you know, pixel suffixes. Yeah, this here, for example, this would be a good example where we have a string px, which is only there to make the config file nicer for humans. It doesn't have any meaning to i3. It just reads it and then discards it. Right. So we don't need to bother stripping any trailing white space at the end for like tokens that we then discard, right? Like only if we actually want to do something with the token is it relevant. Okay, so let's see. We're just gonna wait. This is wrong syntax. I'll need to like find my way back into C. It's been a long time. So okay, parse string str, and then what we're gonna do is set up a compile command which just goes into our build directory, runs Ninja to compile it. There we go. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, right. Okay, for some reason I can't figure it out. Well, let's see. If we do an i3 restart, we read this back. We look at the log again. Right, okay, so here we can see the new message that we just added. So that's good. That means we're working in the right code base, like the right working copy, and the changes that we make actually do have an effect. Always good to verify when you start to like work on something. Okay, so we should be able to find like an output space in here somewhere. Huh, no, we don't for some reason. Oh, default space. Right, and we do find that. Good. Okay, so this is corresponding to the line that we just added here. So I think at this point we can say, I think what we'll need is a character pointer to the end. So I think let's think it through. So str is like the beginning of the string, and then string length is like, you know, it's for example 1 for a string of the length of 1, so that works out. So we add 1, and that means that our pointer end should now point to the trailing null byte. Right, so this should be true. And then if we print it just for fun, this would be the empty string. Like we would expect this to say end star star, right? Okay, recompile, restart. Right, end is star star. Okay, and now we can say, we inspect the character, the previous character, right? Look at the previous character, and then we say, while this is a white space, and let's see what we consider as white space elsewhere. We say it's anything that is a literal space character or a tab. So we say, while the end character is a white space, and we also, well, the termination check, that can't really happen. We need a different check, because we don't want to like, what happens if the string is entirely white space? We do want to go to the very beginning of the string, but no further, right? Because otherwise we override different memory, and that's never a good idea. So we want to check that end is larger than string. And if the string is only white space, then, well, it just will end up a single white space, right? So we essentially collapse white space at the end with this approach. Okay, and then we say, if it's a white space, first of all, we terminate a string here. And then secondly, we need to go one back to see if there's more white space. And if not, the loop is over and everything's good. So we can say after white space, let's also add the new line here. All right, restart. Okay, cool. And we can already see that the bar reappeared. So this seems to be a good fix, or at least a fix that works. Yeah, so these messages are exactly what we would expect. Right, it points at the T, which is where it stops, because that's like the first non-white space character. And we can see that the string has been freed of white space. Cool. Well, that's promising. So let's see. It's not too bad. Actually, do a Clang format. Why does this not work? Oh, I might not have this package installed. Okay, let's do a quick detour to the Emacs packager. So, Clang format. I'm gonna install this one. All right. And then Clang formatted. No such program. Right. But I don't think. Oh, right. I think these are like in opt, which might not be in my path. But also, I'm not sure why it looks for 3.8. Clang format 3.8. Let's see. Maybe it's like in the package description, or maybe there's configuration for that package. Clang format, that's the one. So let's see. Clang format 3.4 and newer is required. That should be no problem. But then it doesn't cover really where it finds the Clang format. Okay, well, let's take a quick look. Right, Clang format executable. Oh, that's a custom thing. Okay, cool. So, let's see. What do we want to do? We want to grab Clang format and see if we have like a version somewhere. Oh, I think maybe this actually skips over hidden directories. Right. Okay, cool. So here we use Clang format 10 for the i3 codebase. We change the version number every once in a while. Essentially, what we want to do is use the Clang format that most people are likely to either already have installed or that they would be able to install on like a typical Ubuntu system or what have you. So what we want to do is say customize, look for Clang format variables. Oh, this explains why it's looking for Clang format 3.8, because apparently at some point I had it already specifically set to Clang format 3.8. Okay, quick mystery then. Let's put this in here, and I think if we say apply, or even apply and save, go back to the C file. Well, that didn't work. But it should apply immediately, I do think, right? Oh, okay. Why don't we just restart? Still doesn't work. But did it actually? Oh, that didn't work. Huh. I do wonder why. Oh, maybe Emacs. Maybe I'm actually like explicitly overwriting that somewhere. Oh, right. See, there's like a .clang format. But that's fine. So that's just a config file. It doesn't influence version selection. Right. Oh yeah. So this function is for invoking clang format when there is a .clang format. Fair enough. But then I don't think it sets the version somewhere. Right, so we can see that in the custom.el, the variable is there. It's just for some reason, like the interactive edit that I just did in Emacs didn't take. I don't know why. But let's not waste so much time on this and just try to make it work. Great, okay. So now, if we look at the div, well, there's still trailing white space here, but otherwise it's now nicely formatted. Well, no, wait, it actually isn't. What? Why is it not formatted? Does it maybe like... Oh, it wants to format a specific region, not the entire file. Okay, not the greatest default, if you ask me, but hey, as long as it works. Okay, so let's go through this again. So we're now changing the config file parser to whenever there's like a string that it parsed, it strips trailing whitespace. So one thing that we need to do is to ensure that this change is actually safe to do. And for i3, we actually have a pretty extensive test suite. So if we run this, yeah. Oh, right, okay. So we have a couple of checks that check that there should be no errors reported with a config file that doesn't have any errors. And obviously, because we added all of this stuff, all of these error messages here, that test now fails. So let's remove all of that debug logging that we added while developing. Right, and then try this again. Cool, okay, so that passes. Great, that means that that's actually probably a good enough fix. One thing that we should still do is write a test to verify this behavior, right? Because we don't want it to break down the line and for the poor person who found the bug to have to reopen it and tell us that we broke it in the meantime. So what we'll do is we'll say comment out this region so that we can reproduce the original issue and then comment it back in, see if the test then passes, right? All right, so test cases, right, we actually have, let's see, a new test script that allows us to create a new test case file from a template. And if we look into it, I think it has a bug parameter. Ah, right, no, it's in the template. Okay, cool. So we're going to say new test bar output trailing space. Okay. It tried to start an editor from there, but we're already in the editor, so let's just open the file. You can see that it didn't do a lot, but it gave us the template, so that's great. We want to use that. Okay, so this is the issue number 5064. Oh, by the way, I should probably assign this to myself, just so that there's no duplicate work. And then we need a brief description of this file. Let's say verifies that any trailing space in strings, including bar output, in particular, is stripped. Trailing white space. Okay, good enough. Okay, so what we want to do in this test case is essentially provide a config file to i3 which has the trailing space in there, and then verify that the bar config that we can obtain via the IPC interface has the trailing space. And then as soon as we change the code, it should no longer have it, and that's what we want to verify, all right? So essentially, this is going to be like a more automated reproducer of what we did at the beginning of the stream. So let's see. I think, so there's like two mechanisms with which you can launch i3 with a specific config file in our test suite. So either you use the launch with config, but then you need to disable auto start, right? Like you can no longer have the test suite start i3 for you. You're going to start it yourself, and then you provide the config file. That's great if you need to start multiple instances of i3 with different configs. But for our case, I think the easier thing would be to copy this approach, where when we say use i3 test, we provide a config file right then and there, and then that is just the one config file that your test is running with. So that would be something like this. We would need, actually the bar config doesn't need to refer to an existing output, really. It can be anything. And then it's important that there is a trailing space afterwards. Okay, so I think, yeah, there's already a test case that verifies that the bar config mechanism works. So we can just like use that one. All right, outputs is actually a list, it seems. Okay. So maybe we do need more than one test case after all then, because we would want to test like a single entry and multiple entries in there. Okay, but let's start with a single config and then expand it from there. So I do wonder why this is not highlighting correctly, in the sense that it's stopping here, but like the editor doesn't realize. Well, let's see what to let's see if it runs. Let's see what the test runner says. Okay, and then we need the bar ID. Right. Okay, so the test runner is called complete run because it does a complete run of all of the tests. And it accepts a file name argument. So we can say 317 bar output trailing space. Okay, so this is why it's not highlighting it correctly, I suppose. All right, because the EOT must not be followed by a semicolon. Okay, and then it's saying i3 is not a variable, which just means that we need to copy over this declaration also. Okay, cool. Okay, so now we get a test failure. It says status command correct, so that would be this test message here, and it complains because we don't specify a status command in our config, yet the test wants one. So this should be anything. Okay, and this passes. Why does it pass? It shouldn't pass, should it? Because like the anything should still have a trailing space here, I think. Oh, I mean, unless... Right, interesting. So I was able to run the tests without recompiling i3 because I wasn't going through the build system. I was running complete run myself, and that's the problem. If I had used Ninja test, it would have gone through the build system, figured out that it needs to recompile i3. But I didn't do that because then I would have run all of the tests and I was only interested in running one test. Okay, but so far so good. So now we see the white space is there. The white space shouldn't be there. So why don't we extend this now and like split it up into multiple smaller tests? Right, so we're gonna say i3 auto start is disabled. My config file equals this literal, and then that's all we need, plus the exit gracefully to make it clean up. Okay, we can see that still works. We still get the same error message here. We can also verify that it passes. Yep, okay, that's good. The test itself is okay. So what we want to do is test with a single output, and we also want to have a test with multiple outputs for a single bar. All of these variables are already defined, so we'll just reuse them. And now let's see, we're gonna say no space, single space, and the single space has a trailing single space after it. So here we would expect no space and single space, and neither should have space. Good, okay. Cool, so let's go back here, compile this back in, recompile i3, rerun the tests. There we go, all clean. Very nice. So now stage the test, stage the change, and oh, interesting. Why? What's its problem? Let's see if this is a quick fix or not. I think I'm going to look into this later. So what we'll do for now is say git commit and do it from the command line. All right, and then we say config parser strip trailing white space in strings. And then we say it fixes this bug. And I think that's all we need. Let's see, what does it say here? So let's take another look at the commit that we have, just to see if there's any issues that we can spot. But yeah, I think that looks reasonable. This is all updated, looks reasonable. The test with the trailing space. Right. Okay, so what we'll do is spin off a branch, call it trailing space, use pp to push it out, and then go to the i3 repository. It tells me I pushed a new branch. in the new branch, we can see the change we just did. Cool. And then let's see if any of our other maintainers have time to review this. They create a pull request. Cool. So now the continuous integration will build, check the formatting, which we fixed, check that the tests still run, which we checked. So hopefully this should all turn green into just 2 to 3 minutes or so. And then in here in the issue, we should see that there is now a reference to this commit. Great. Okay, any questions up until here? This would be like a natural point to answer some questions. Is there a good way for i3 to handle plug-and-play multi-monitor support? In Sway, it works out of the box, but on X-based window managers, it seems to be a bit of a problem. Well, it's not really that much of a problem, really. So if we look at i3 docs user guide, you can see that there are a couple of mechanisms with which you can put workspaces on specific screens. So for example, if you want to influence which workspaces you use on which screen, some of them on the external monitor, some of them on your internal, maybe notebook monitor or desktop computer monitor, you can just assign individual workspaces to them. But other than that, whenever a new monitor appears, i3 will just create a workspace for it, right? So the only thing you need to take care of when you plug in an extra monitor is that you actually enable it on the X level, right? And for that, what you want to do is use a tool such as xrender, which, sorry, I used earlier. So that would be this tool. And you can say something like xrender output HDMI 3 auto to just turn it on with like the native resolution. And that is good enough to make i3 recognize it and start a workspace on it, and then you can just move things around. And if you want to even automate this particular step, I think there are tools that will automatically look at new hardware being attached and then try and configure the monitor using render. I think maybe a render is a tool that might be able to do this. Just get in org a render. At least it's a visual thing with which you can just click and drag things. Oh, maybe I was thinking about auto render or something like that. Right, yeah, I think that's the one. Right, and this is available in plenty of Linux distributions. Right, and I think if you plug in a monitor, that is a tool that would allow you to do everything automatically. So I hope that answers the question. There's really not much to it. Like i3 just deals with whatever setup you have, and as long as you make that setup reflect what you want in terms of which monitor is where logically, like which one is left, which one is right, or which one is mirrored, all of that should be fine. Cool. Let's see. Okay, so all of the checks turned green, which means that this is now good to go, and as soon as we have a review, we could merge this and thereby address the blank space. So that's one issue down. Maybe let's try and take one other, and then maybe that'll be enough for today. So this one I already looked into, and I think it is pending requester action. Yeah, 4 days ago I replied and gave a couple of ideas and asked for more details. So I think we're going to take a look at the Pango markup one. So someone's saying that on startup, the -- Pango attribute is not being applied on mode lines until a reload command is issued. And it is again discarded after a restart command. They reproduced it with a dummy user. That's always a great sign. And they're saying that using a font other than Pango Terminus fixes the issue. But the font alone is not a problem. And the minimal config file using the font appears to work. And then we see a couple of error messages. There's a link to a config file. Yeah, and I think, right, Cycon already looked into it and said they can't reproduce the issue. And then I think later down the line, right, the original reporter narrowed it down to a minimal config that triggers the issue. Also great. And then they're saying a font must be defined using Pango prior to the bar being defined and included in the config. Aha. So it seems like the config file parsing is not hermetic in the sense that what it does in one pass influences what it does in the other passes. Or, you know, the order in which it goes through the directives is actually relevant when it shouldn't be. Okay, so some random guesses. Font is Pango. Things are order dependent in the config, right? And then Orestes figured out, well, the core reason seems to be that if no font was explicitly said, we default to using the i3 font. Okay, let's see what they mean by that. Oh, why can't I click this? Weird. Right, so in the bar finish, oh, so is the problem that, let's see, this config file, aha, so they're using include test bar, right, so they're defining a bar block, and then afterwards they have the font directive. So that means that at parsing time, like here, the font isn't set. Okay, let's see if we can actually reproduce this. So, right, and then, yeah, we should probably just copy this over. All right, and they're also saying these work, right? Because they're defining a font first, and then they're including, and then they're defining a font here, which isn't a Pango font, which, you know, obviously Pango markup won't work. And then, yeah, it works if you define the font before. Yep, that makes sense. Okay, let's take a look. So output default, we're done with that. We have a font directive here. So we're going to move that right above here. And then we have a monospace 10 in the bar itself. We're going to remove that. And yeah, we wanted that mode definition where there's some markup in that definition, right? That makes sense. Okay, cool. So I believe, yeah, T is not a good key, but I think if we just use $mod plus X, that should not be otherwise used. Okay, let's restart it. X, okay, cool. We can see that now here in the bar, we have mode and then test, hard to read, but at least very visible that there's some markup going on. If we press escape, we go out of that mode. So far so good. And now, if we say font is defined afterwards, and we go into that, yeah, we see that the mode is now, like the Pango markup is now printed here as part of, you know, in the form of just HTML. Okay, so I'm thinking, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the code. We're gonna switch back to our other branch because, you know, the trading space stuff is done. Let's take a look at config directives, bar finish. Oops. Right, and then Orestes pointed out that this here is the problem. So we're going to add an error message here. Just print the current bar font. We expect this to be a null pointer. But we also expect font pattern to be a null pointer in this case. Okay, so we're gonna rebuild i3 and then restart, check log. Right, both of these are null pointers as we expect. So, okay. I think config, right. So I do wonder, like, I think we have a couple of places where we fill in defaults, and I don't know if we try and do all of it during parsing or if some of it is after parsing already. So why don't we jump into parse config? That's what we looked at earlier, actually. But I think here, this is really just the parser, right? So this is what processes all of the content and calls all of the directive functions. And then I think here is the earliest where, for example, the check for duplicate bindings, that is already working on the current config, yeah. So the config has already been replaced at that point, has it? I think so. Right, so let's see. One thing we could also do is just go through the code path for a full reload, just to see what we run there. So we go into load configuration. And in here, okay, so this is where we can see that we have like a default stuff that we set up before parsing the config. We clear out the old config. And then this is where we run parse file. Right, and you can see here that we have some more validation. Maybe at some point we need to consolidate this or reorder it, but for now we're just going to leave things largely as they are and try to work with what we've got. So it says extract workspace names from bindings, and then it reorders the bindings, and then it checks for whether you didn't specify a font. So what we can do, right, get this log in here. And I think instead of font pattern, this would be config dot. Oh, this is different, because I think config.font is loaded from the font pattern. We should probably take a look at where that is actually happening. So let's see, we have config.c and config parser. And config directives. And it looks like in the directives, we only specify. All right, in the current bar, oh, right, the current bar font is just a font specification, whereas the config.font, that's actually an already loaded i3 font. Oh, and here's where it does that, right? So this is like an uninitialized font, right? And that would mean that if we search for font type Right. So this is where the fonts are loaded. And this is called from load font. Right, that is our entry point. So when we call that from either config directives, right? So so the font is immediately loaded if while we're parsing it. A question from chat: what's that you're working on? We are working on the i3 window manager. You can find more details at i3wm.org. And in particular, we're looking into an issue that we want to fix before the release, where the font parsing is order dependent. So the font that you specify for i3 overall influences which font it uses as a default for a bar block. And if you introduce a bar block before that to customize the bar at the bottom of the screen, and then afterwards you specify a font, it doesn't do like sort of the default fallback that it normally does. Right, so load font is in here. And I think if we look at the bar finish, it only font pattern, where's that from actually? Oh, wow, okay. So that's essentially, oh, interesting. So this is actually specifically a global variable that we only use for this particular purpose. Maybe we can get rid of this one as well, clean it up while we're here. Let's see. But then the question, like for me, the question is, oh, right, the bar config, like we only prepared the config in i3, and then i3 bar as a separate program would be the one that actually loads the font here. So we only need to care about the font pattern, I think, and not about any other aspects of the font. So I think we can look here and say, this is where we do the fallback load, right? So at this point, like in this line, is where we for sure should have config.font set. So if we just go through the bar configs here, go through bar configs, add font pattern where it's null, right? That is, I think roughly that should be the fix. So in the directives, bar configs, we probably already have a loop here somewhere, like this one. Let's just copy that over. Okay, so we loop through it and then we say if current, oh, it's just called font, okay. Not font pattern. If current font is already set, we continue, and otherwise we need to initialize it from the config file wide font. Initialize bar config font pattern. Right. Okay, let's see if we are on the right track here. Yeah, so that message now shows up. So yeah, maybe we can do it like this. So what we want is config.font.pattern. And let's see. We just do a string duplication of the font pattern here. And I think Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. So let's go back to, sorry, config.c. Config.font.pattern, and then we can just say parent font equals stringed up config font pattern. Make bar config blocks without a font, without a configured font, use the IP white font. Okay, let's build it, restart it. That already looks better. Yeah, and now we can see that the Pango markup is actually evaluated here. Cool. And yeah, now I think that actually we can probably just like remove this entire thing here. And I believe that font pattern is only used in here. So yeah, probably just get rid of this entire thing, this entire variable. Yep, still works, still here. Cool. Well, that was another nice fix. We should be able to write a test for this too. So we're gonna do it exactly like the last time. So we're gonna move our changes out of the way. I'm gonna start the test, verify the test fails, move the changes back in, verify the test passes. Off-topic question, how do you like the Advantage 360 so far? So for those folks who don't know, let's see. Oh God, right. So many warnings. Oh, right, and I can't browse that. I can only scroll down here. Oh my God, okay. So if you log into Twitter, you can find a recent tweet of mine with a video link to the Kinesis Advantage 360 review. But currently I'm not actually using it. Like what I'm typing on, yeah, right, Twitter is awful when unauthenticated, yeah, true. What I'm currently typing on is still the old Advantage 2, where I changed all of the key switches to be cherry blue key switches. And like when I try to switch to the Advantage 360, which otherwise is really nice, I immediately noticed that it has different key switches and I just don't like them as much. And it's not as satisfying to type on them. So I find myself going back to the keyboards that I have with the blue key switches. So probably I'll need to modify the Advantage at some point and solder in the proper key switches. But, you know, one thing at a time. Okay, so we have all of these changes. I'm gonna just stash them. So now they're here in this git stash. They're no longer in my working copy. And we already did like the new test thing before. We're gonna do it again. And also we should probably say, assign this to me. Pango markup not applied on startup, but I think a better description for this problem is bar config font order or something like that, because it has all the right keywords. Like this is really about the bar configs, it is about the font key specifically, and it is about the order in which you specified it. So with the benefit of hindsight, we can actually do a better description here. Okay, so verifies that bar config blocks gets the IP white font configured regardless of where the font is configured in the config file, before or after the bar config block. Yep. Okay, and then let's set up our test command. So 317 bar config font order. The test is empty, so it should pass. Yeah, and it did pass, and it said no tests, so that is expected. Cool. And what we're gonna do, let's see. So in the other test, we started out with just a single config file and then quickly switched to multiple config files. Let's see, do we need multiple config files here? I think the general case of you configure the font first and then the bar later is already pretty well covered by other tests. So probably we can just do with one single config file. And then let's see if we need to extend it. So I believe this should be the syntax, but I probably want to copy at least the first 2 lines anyway, just so that i3 detects it as a proper version 4 config file. Though, to be honest, at some point we should probably flip this default, and because, you know, version 4 has been around for so many years. So at this point, hopefully all of the old version 3 users have upgraded their config file. Anyway, that's for another time. So what we want here is a bar config block and no font directive here. No i3 white font configured yet. So this should roughly be it. And then we want the bar config file test that we looked at earlier. Is that the sweet sound of the new keyboard? Unfortunately not. No, I just talked about this actually. No, so I like the cherry blue key switches much more than the cherry browns. And the new keyboard that I have, you know, it's not modified yet, so it still has the browns. So I find myself gravitating back towards my old keyboard. Such is life. Okay, so what we want to do here is, again, with the bars. And then we want to look at font. And we need to obtain the bar config first. Right, let's see what it says. Something does not look good in here. Right. Bar ID. Oh yeah, right. Of course. Need to declare this as a variable. Cool. Okay, so now it says failed test, no bars. Yeah, we don't need that. We don't want that. And then it says got fixed, expected terminus. Right. And what did we do again? We didn't recompile i3. So now what it'll say is got undef, expect terminus. And I think what we want fixed, right? Yeah, and that should actually already be it. So let's just pop our stash, recompile, rerun the test. There we go. Nice and simple. Okay, stage the test. Let's do a double check on these changes. Let's make sure they're formatted. These are just deletions, no formatting there. The font pattern, yeah, we no longer need it. All right, and then in i3 we use this common syntax with the /* everywhere. And then just stage alt that. And because there's probably still something wrong, I'm going to do it via the command line. So, hello. Someone's asking, couldn't you have just ordered it with the keys that you prefer? Is it something you need to do on your own? So the issue is that the new Kinesis keyboards, they were launched on drop for pre-order, right? And I think you can sort of do customization, but if you wanted to do that, then you can't just say, oh, pre-order, just give me something and give it to me quick. You need to like have your keyboard go to this third-party company, which then does like the customization for you, and then they ship it to you. So it like delays everything. And I think it might not even have been available at the point when I pre-ordered, right? Which has been, I think, like almost a year or more in the past. So I don't necessarily need to do it myself, but if I want someone else to do it, it's going to take a long time, and who knows when they'll even be able to ship the first customized keyboard. So maybe it is quicker, bottom line, if I just do it myself. But even for that, I need to ask Kinesis to send me PCBs into which I can solder my own key switches, which is going to take some time just for the shipping and the logistics. And thus far, I haven't even asked them because I know they're so busy with the launch of the new keyboard. So I just want to give them some space and not overwhelm them with all of these sort of weird edge casey requests. So, you know, maybe in a couple of weeks, I'll start this whole endeavor. Okay, so let's give this commit a description, config, set bar block font to a white font after parsing. Otherwise, the font directive needs to come before the bar blocks, which is surprising to users. And then we say this fixes this particular issue. Commit that. Let's see. Spin off a branch. Let's call it font. Push it to my personal repository, go to the i3 repository and compare. Okay, so last chance to look at what we're doing here. We're going, after parsing, we go through all of the bar config blocks. If there's no font, we will set it from like the config.font, which conveniently is initialized right here. So even if the person doesn't specify any font at all, they should get like a font here. Okay, this can all go away. Here's our test. Yeah, I think this looks reasonable. Let's select our reviewers. Create pull request. There we go. Okay, so we got a review comment here from Airblader, and he said, from the parser spec. In the bar output, there's a string here, yes, and then he's saying, what is the significance of string versus something like word here? Is the issue rather that we should use word in the spec? Right. So let's take a look. We are going to change back our branch to, how do we call this? There's too many branches here, as you can see. One sec. We can see it in here. Trailing space. That's branch name. Trailing space. And then in our commit, we went into config parser.c. String. Right. Okay, and then we have word, right? And word is like a string, but not as permissive. And only, let's see, no, I think both can be quoted, right? Is there a difference though? Right, so this is string specific. Right, and for a word, the delimiter naturally is already white space. So the only question is, if we want to change string to word in order to fix this, could there be any of the delimiters that word stops on in the display output name? And like most probably not, but let's just go through them and really think about it. So white space would be a space character or a tab, no. Closing square bracket, no. Comma and semicolon, very unlikely. So we probably just could make it a word. And then we don't need to necessarily strip the trailing white space. I mean, we could still do it, I suppose. But if we don't have to, it's safer to not do it, right? To err on the side of caution and do the minimal change that really fixes the problem. So let's compile. And do we still have the... Which test did we add here? It was this one here. Okay. Test passes. Okay, so if we go back into config parser and we say, no, this was all wrong, we don't need it, and this time, why don't we just add the recompile into our loop? Right, so now the test fails again, good. Now we go into the specs and we say config.spec bar output, and we just make this a word. We see that the tray output is already a word. So I'm thinking directives bar output, but this is just appending, right? So I was thinking maybe there's like, maybe it needs to be a string because it then like splits it down into comma separated things or white space separated things, but none of that is going on. So it really is just, you give it one output directive and that's what it uses. So I think this should be fine. Let's see. Yeah, test works. So this is a more minimal fix, which I generally like. So I think we're gonna revise our thing. And so I've been using maggot this entire time here and nobody has asked about it so far, but I'm gonna enable screen key for you and walk you through how I'm gonna do this because I know that it's very quick and people get confused. So maggot is an Emacs user interface for Git, right? It's like Git, but magic. And its whole deal is that it is single key menu driven. So if I open the help with question mark, you can see that there's a lot of keys. And I've been using, for example, the S key to stage things. I've been using the B key to change my branches and so on. So what I want to do here is I want to, first of all, let's say the deletion here. We want to stage that, right? So I'm just going to say S for stage. We can see that it previously was in the unstaged changes category. It's now in staged changes. We can go onto it, press tab to open up the div or collapse it again with tab. And the other change that we need is here, the output equals string to output equals word. So press S for this one. We see both of them are staged now. And what we can do is now we can say commit. And no, wait, actually. All right. Yeah, something is wrong here. This is not what I wanted. Okay, I'll figure this out later. What I wanted to do is press C and then A for commit and then amend. But we can just do this on the command line as well. Git commit -- amend. Right. Yeah, I don't know why like the commit message editing is screwed up. I think it's because of the stream setup. Like something is not ideal with my config files and the stream user, but I'll figure that out some other time. Okay, so now we can see the updated commit. We can say push. We can say push. We need force because we're overriding a change that we've already pushed. So we say -F. You can say force with lease is now active. And then we say P for push to the trading space branch in my personal repository. Okay, so now the pull request should be updated. We should see here the little message saying we force pushed to trading space So now if we check files changed, we can see this is just string to word and our test case. And then we're going to look into the conversation and we're going to say, that is a more minimal fix. Thank you for the suggestion. Done. All right. And the GitHub actions here should hopefully turn green again. And then we can eventually merge this. So let's see. Oh, this one, Orestes already approved. Thank you. Very nice. So now what we can do is we can say squash and merge. We can see here it says this is going to be your title of the commit. This is the message. It all looks good to me. So we can say confirm squash and merge. Perfect. The branch can be deleted. Let's delete it right away. So that means that we have one issue fixed. And if we go back to our release tracker here, we can see that this one is now marked as fixed. The blank space, we have a fix pending. This one here, as I said, requires an update from the reporter. I think for this one here, I already sent the pull request, but it didn't get any reviews. So maybe what I'll need to do is ping my reviewers individually on this one. So let's assign them here, get this moving forward. Cool, Airblade approved this one. So now all we need to do is wait for this CI to turn green and then we can merge this one also. And then we're a good step closer to getting this release out the door. The only things that we'll need to do afterwards is see if the reporter of these pull requests replies in time and see if we can do anything about these. But those are probably for Orestes to investigate. Today I learned about force with lease. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit nicer than force. So good to use by default. And I like that Maggot just makes it the default for me so I don't need to think about and remember it. Cool. Yeah, I think this is a good point to stop the stream for today. Are there sort of any last minute questions? Anything that super confused you and you want to see, or are we all good here? Now is your chance to speak up in the chat. Thanks for the stream. Yeah, you're very welcome. Let's see here. More of these streams, please. Cool, yeah. Cool, okay, so this turned green. So let's squash and merge it, config parser, strip the trailing white space. Oh, this is actually now prevent trailing white space in output by string to word. Confirm. Delete the branch. Let's check the commit history and it should be properly in here. So we can see this one that we did earlier. We can see this one. Cool. This looks good. All right. Oh, this one's also approved now. This was a fun one. The problem here, let's see. So as you know, like the log file that we used here, so the i3 dump log, that's working via shared memory. And the reason why it's in shared memory is so that even if the i3 process crashes, you can still grab the log file, right? Because the dump log tool is entirely distinct from the i3 program. It doesn't need it to work. And we need to figure out how much memory we reserve in the shared memory segment. And the logic for it was that we reserve 1% of your RAM, but at most 25 megabytes. But the problem is that this check was broken. And it was broken in an interesting way, because if you have a machine that has 265 gigabytes of memory, then this calculation won't work because it turns out the variable sizes were wrong. So the physical memory bytes is a long, and the shared memory log size was just an int. And if you do the comparison with min, then it would end up with like a negative value for the size of your log file, which obviously can't work. So one solution here is to ensure that the comparison happens in long on both of the sides. So that's why this is naturally long, and this one here, we specifically make sure that the compiler treats it as a long, and then that comparison works, and only in that case we change the shared memory log size to 1% of the RAM, and otherwise it defaults to its 25 megabytes. So this now works even with ridiculous amounts of memory. So we also have this one approved, so we're going to say squash and merge, tested it on a machine with lots of memory. Let's merge it, delete it. Okay. So I think now this is looking up. We have this one fixed, these two fixed. This one will do it if the reporter answers in time for the release, otherwise we'll push it out to the next release. Cool, okay, so as I mentioned, I think we're gonna stop it here. Thanks for watching and see you next time.